Hey everyone, and welcome to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today we're going to be looking at the Anbernic RG353V. In a world where Miu Mini Plus screens are popping out of their shells, the Anbernic RG353V has been a surprisingly consistent and well-built device over the last month or so that I've been using it, especially for the Canadian price of $165. I have the specs up on the screen, not really going to deep dive into them as there isn't much to talk about, but I am going to be sharing how I've set mine up and some tips to help you throughout the process. Now, before I jump in, I do want to mention that I'll only be looking at the Android side of things. It's just my preferred operating system, and it's what I use on all my handhelds, so let's just jump right in. There's a lot of good here, some bad, and let's go into it. First and foremost, there's a few things to point out in the box and throughout the unboxing. Mine came with a factory applied screen protector that's meant to be removed. I've seen a few people put the included screen protector on top of this. It's okay, I sometimes forget to wear my glasses too. Just check yours and make sure when you open it. Also, there's a charging cable included, and this is pretty important. You want to make sure that what you're plugging the device into for charging is 5 volts and 2 amps or under, or around there. That means no fast charging, super fast charging, ludicrous speed, or anything else. We've seen people's devices have major issues after using a fast charger. I'm personally using a Samsung charger, as you can see here, and I've had no issues with it. Last point to mention here is that Anbernic actually made 2 versions of the screen on this device, so the newer manufactured ones will have a version 2 screen, like mine, and older devices will have the version 1 screen. The differences don't affect anything from a gameplay perspective, however, it does affect what operating systems you can use. Stock Android works perfectly as it comes out of the box, but if you're someone who wants to use Black Seraph's Android build instead, that does not work as of right now, but he is working on it, just no timeline as of yet. Lastly, if the SD card that comes with the device is unbranded, you're better off chucking it. Personally though, I'd recommend chucking it either way, branded or unbranded, and buying one from a reputable brand like Samsung or SanDisk. Now let's talk about the actual device for a second. It's nice feeling in the hands, doesn't feel particularly cheap to me. The buttons, the D-pad, screen, everything looks and feels pretty great, with some small caveats. For me, I'm not personally a fan of the analog sticks. I find them to be a bit cramped and uncomfortable to use. It's one of the major drawbacks to this device for me personally. I also have small issues with the D-pad and registering false diagonals, which I'll show a little bit later on. Another hardware related thing I do want to mention is the device does tend to get pretty hot in the back. Not scalding hot, but it does get pretty warm and hot, so be aware. As you can see here, I'm using the Daijisho Front End. Definitely my favorite for Android, easy to set up and use. I'll do a separate video on this setup so you can get an idea of how I've done it, but for now let's talk about Android as a whole on this device. Now, everyone has different ways of doing this, but I'm going to share what I do, and so by extension, my way is the best way and everyone else is wrong, of course. But when I first got it, I deleted and removed all the included emulators as well as deleted their respective folders. Gave me a clean slate to work with, and then I put the Play Store on it. I'll have a video on this process as well, just to help you get up and running. You can see the emulators I have installed here, and you'll see the cores I'm using for RetroArch during the game showcase. You'll also notice an app called DriveSync. This app uploads all of my saves to the cloud automatically when I charge my device, just a setting that I've chosen, which I'll share in another video as well to help kind of walk you through what that looks like. But let me talk about 2 issues I've noticed with Anbernic's Android build. The first is a small one. When you put the device in sleep mode, it'll disconnect your Wi-Fi, and when coming back from sleep mode, it takes a few seconds to get back. This can be pretty annoying, and you just want to jump into a game after sleep mode and have retro achievements working. The other issue is a bit more of a major one. L2 and R2 don't seem to work in some Android native games I've tested, with Dead Cells being a prime example. You can see here it actually registers as R1 for some weird reason. I've reached out to Anbernic on this, but they haven't responded. Other than those 2 things, stock Android has been stable and working great for me over this past month. You also see here that I'm testing using an Xbox controller via Bluetooth, which connects easily and works with no input lag that I can tell. Now, for what you care about the most, let's get into the game showcase. Let's start off with a game to test the D-pad. You can see here in Contra for the NES that by pushing down on the D-pad and moving left and right, the character still moves. Ideally, this shouldn't be happening, and also unfortunately, it's an issue with many D-pads across many devices. Okay, so jumping right in, 8-bit and 16-bit systems are going to run great on this device, no shocker there, and it's probably what most people are going to want to play on this thing. I mean, who are we kidding? You're going to boot up Super Mario World for the 1000th time and get to the first castle and never touch it again. And this is the perfect device to do that with. But on a more serious note, if you're someone who plays past that castle, as you can hopefully see, the screen looks great and the colors pop. I found myself enjoying this screen quite a bit and surprised by how well it looks. It's no OLED screen, so don't have those expectations, but it does look great for the price point. Now let's talk about DS for a second. DS for the most part runs good, and I could see some people playing DS games on this device. Personally, I have trouble with the small screen and switching back and forth between the DS screens to have it work for me, but otherwise using Drastic and with those caveats, you could get by. Continuing with the theme of what doesn't work for me, I mentioned it before, but I'm personally not a fan of the sticks on this device and find them to be a bit cramped or a bit hard to use. So while PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64 both run well on this device at a 1x resolution, I personally chose not to play those systems past my first week or so of having this device. It just wasn't my preference. You might have a better or different experience here. It's just for me, the sticks just got in the way personally. Dreamcast overall doesn't run super great, as you can see here. In Sonic 2 especially, the audio is crackling and delayed, but the video frame rate is decent. I don't think Dreamcast should be what you're looking at with this device unless you plan on heavily tweaking it. The other issue is Sonic games aren't good anyways, so none of this really matters. Lastly, PSP actually runs pretty well here for games I like to play, which is mostly the strategy RPG genre. Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions with the slowdown patch and Jeanne d'Arc both run pretty well at a 2x resolution. The main issue here is the text on the screen is a little small. Otherwise, PSP games tend to run pretty well on this device. Now let's talk about Android games, and like I mentioned before, L2 and R2 do not work in native Android games like Dead Cells, but performance-wise, after fixing the text resolution, the game runs pretty well. If you don't mind remapping the controls, I could see some people playing this here. I find the small screen to just not work for me personally with this game, so it might not be the best for everyone, but it is an option. Also, on the topic of Android games, Stardew Valley just kept crashing for me. Anytime you'd select new game, the game would crash. I have not been able to get it to work to this day, and I don't know of a fix. And lastly, for the Pokemon fans out there, JoyPlay did not seem to work for me either. Carrying on into the realm of what's possible but isn't what I do territory is an app called xBPlay, and it allows remotely playing Xbox 360 and Xbox One games. Microsoft has an official xCloud app. This is just a lot better considering it actually works with 360 games as well, as long as you have an Xbox One. So you can see here that I have Lost Odyssey up and running, which is streaming from my Xbox One S to this device. Surprisingly, it works pretty well, with the small text again being just a major drawback. And that same issue runs true on the PlayStation side of things as well with an app called PS Play. Sony has an official remote play app, it just doesn't work with every single device out there, where I found PS Play seems to work with everything no matter what controller you're using. So this is me running Persona 5 Royale, and again, it's just the text that's an issue, but otherwise it runs pretty well. Lastly, same situation here in Moonlight as you can see with Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I think with all three streaming services, I don't see how it's going to fit into this device, and it might just be a small subset of people that are going to be doing this, but I still want to show them off anyways, just to show you what it looks like with this device. One other thing to mention is that with all three streaming services, the L2 and R2 buttons actually do work. So it seems to only be the native Android games that have that issue, so you don't have to worry about that, at least with streaming. And that's it for my review and showcase of the Anbernic RG353V. For some closing thoughts, this is a great device, and I'd recommend it to anyone that is looking at a Game Boy form factor and doesn't mind the caveats I've mentioned before, main ones being the cramped analog sticks and lack of L2R2 functionality. But otherwise, if you want to play the entire 8 and 16-bit era and dabble into some Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1, PSP, this would be a great device to pick up. For me personally, after a month of using it for what I like to play, I'm waiting for the Anbernic RG405M, and I'm excited to test that one out. I think that'll fit my needs better with a wider range of games to play and looks to be a lot more ergonomic with stick placement. Plus, I'm just a fan of horizontal handhelds. So I'm excited to get a review out when I get that device in my hands and keep an eye out for that as well. As I mentioned before in this review, I'll be getting a few more videos out on how to set up the Play Store and adding cloud saving and maybe just a few more device showcases. If you'd like to see me test any specific games on the RG353V, leave it in the comments. I'll see how they do. Hope you liked the video and hope you all have a good one.